the behavior of binge eating is in a strict relationship with how much truth I am telling in an insecure relationship.
As a vegan, do you ever feel like you're living in a parallel universe, aware of things that many others don't even seem to notice, let alone acknowledge? I'm Chrissy Benson, host of the Vegan Posse podcast. We talk with vegans from around the globe who, like you, are living lives of integrity and compassion with an eye toward justice. Through their personal stories, you'll come to see that you're not an outlier. In fact, you're part of an entire posse of individuals who aren't just keeping the peace, they're creating it through their food choices and beyond. You won't be saddling up, but you're in for the ride of your life. Welcome to the Vegan Posse.
Hey Posse, I'm Chrissy Benson, host of the Vegan Posse. So never fear, even though our episodes have been a bit more sporadic lately due to my wacky schedule and additional side projects, the Vegan Posse is still going strong. We are going to be bringing some specialized membership perks this year. So for now, do consider becoming a monthly member through the Buy Me a Coffee app, or contribute toward our operating costs by making a donation to Vegan Posse through Venmo or PayPal. As always, if you haven't yet picked up a copy of the vegan women's fiction classic, Marrying Myself by me, Christine Melanie Benson, what are you waiting for? It's the perfect summer beach read, and it's got a vegan protagonist. By making it an international bestseller, you can help normalize veganism through the arts. Grab your copy on Amazon or at your local indie bookstore, and you can find all the info at my author website, christinemelaniebenson.com. I have done a number of book club events featuring Marrying Myself all around the country, most recently in Atlanta. If you are part of a book club or would like to organize a book group around the anti-romance romance, let me know and I will send you special limited edition bookmarks and provide whatever level of participation makes sense for you and for me. Next, if you'd like to go beyond fictional characters and connect with some real-life vegans for contemplation, camaraderie, and maybe just a little vegan venting, join us via Zoom any or every Tuesday night at 5:30 p.m. Central for Vegan Peace using the link below. Vegan Peace is a live, unrecorded call, so no self-censorship necessary on your part or mine. Hope to see you there. Finally, I do have some coaching spots available on weekday evenings and some weekend availability as well. Email me directly at christinembenson@gmail for personal coaching, IFS coaching, and or vegan lifestyle coaching. And now this week, we have another long-awaited episode of Posse Talk with Jen Howk, our regular, somewhat monthly series where my friend and colleague, Dr. Jen Howk, and I shoot the breeze about life, love, relationships, veganism, and anything else on our minds. If you've got questions or topics that you would like to submit for Posse Talk with Dr. Jen Howk, you can email them to veganposse.email@gmail.com. And be warned, this episode happens to be rather female focused, so gentlemen, beware. Enjoy this conversation with Dr. Jen Howk.
Jen, welcome to the Vegan Posse, or I should say specifically to Posse Talk. But nevertheless, are you ready for the ride of your life?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. Well, you just had a birthday. Happy birthday.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah. And you've also been cracking some codes, is what I hear.
I've been trying to crack some codes, doing what I can.
So yeah, do you want to talk a little about that process?
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's not, I don't know. It sounds very clickbaity, cracking the codes. So I did a video last week about, cracking the code in air quotes of sort of binge eating and food addiction. And this is something, I don't know if we've talked about this on the posse too much, but it is something that, I've struggled with historically. You've had your issues with it. A lot of my clients, I was going to say most of my clients, but I don't I don't know if it's most, but it's certainly a large plurality of clients
Mm.
have a history of struggling with food addiction and disordered eating in one form or another, and very commonly binge eating. And so I, like personally, have been trying to crack my own personal code of what is it that creates this behavior in me and why has it been there since I was about 10 years old? That's my first memory of um I guess, a kind of a proto binge would have been when I was about 10 years old. And so I have just gone to the mountain and back trying to figure out what this is about. And of course, was very attracted to the pleasure trap argument and the it's just the food kind of argument that we live in this world of super normal foods and hyper palatable foods. And that's what contributes to this. And I think that that is part of the story. I think definitely we can't discard the idea that hyperpalatable foods are an important element of why we overdo it when we're trying to self-medicate with food. But the question of why we self-medicate with food, I think, is a separate consideration. And that's kind of what I've been going to. And so, gone to the pleasure trap mountain, done somatic work, done 12-step work, done all the things. And it's only really recently become clear to me that my personal history, and I'm speaking for myself, and I know that this may not apply to everybody, and I'd be interested in hearing your take on this, but that it's the behavior of binge eating is in a strict relationship with how much truth I am telling in an insecure relationship. So I grew up in an insecure relationship with my parents, and insecure in the sense of the attachment architecture of that family system. It was very, very insecure. My parents were very emotionally immature, and it was just not a safe place to be relationally in a lot of ways. And I have tended to, in my adulthood, I have not had what I would define as securely attached relationships. I've had attachment in relationships that are insecure in one way or another. So when I go back and I look at my early binging and what brought that on, like why was I home that afternoon and I decided to eat like half a loaf of bread? What was I doing? What was I trying to quell in myself? What was happening? And it's very clear to me now that I had things I needed to say and I felt I could not say them without threatening the relationship. And I needed the relationship because I was a little kid. You can't alienate your parents when you're 10 years old, and you don't want them in a rage with you because that feels very dangerous. And there just seemed to be no way out. And I had things that were weighing heavily on me that were really that were causing me quite a lot of distress. And it was also clear that I could not talk about them. And obviously I'm not the first person to come up with this hypothesis. There's a lot of language in the food addiction world about eating your feelings or swallowing your pain or swallowing your feelings, that kind of thing. But those phrases never really made sense to me until I really started to identify the specific instances of when have I been in sort of a period of remission, I would say, and when have I relapsed on that remission? And it is always because I am perceiving, I can't tell the truth because I will lose this person. I will drive this person away. They won't love me anymore. And I think the bigger overlay and where that video got a little more complicated is beyond that, the question of, well, why am I drawn to these insecure relationships where the facade is more important than the truth of the relationship? And that is, in my estimation, a result of my own narcissistic wounds. So the fact that I need to be in relationships where I'm sort of seen as better than I am, and that is inherently threatened by the truth. And as long as I'm seeking relationships where I'm perceived as better than I know myself to be, I'm always going to be in this really tenuous position where it feels even more unsafe than it is. And I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. And all of that is very fundamental to my disordered relationship with food. So it's about healing my need to be perceived that way, which I trace back to this kind of, what we would define as a narcissistic wound, this unstable sense of self that comes from being raised in an insecure home.
Hmm.
So that's the
Yeah.
nutshell version, but there's obviously
Yeah, no,
lots to it.
that's a great summary of a very complex dynamic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And it's so interesting to me how we keep uncovering these new layers and these new insights, even after we've been vegan for a long, long time. And yeah, so yeah, very interesting. I mean, I relate to that a lot. For me, I didn't have the same sort of childhood. I would say that for me, food was, I mean, the phrase that I always related to around food was that food was the consolation prize to life.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to have everything I wanted in life. I wasn't going to have anything really that I wanted, but, you know, I could make up for all the other areas of deprivation with
Hmm.
food. So I can certainly identify lots of instances where I was in the sort of dynamic that you're talking about, where there's something I didn't want to express, something that was going to be threatening to a relationship. But I would say for me, especially when I was in the thick of my disease, I wasn't having a lot of relationships.
Mm.
So it was I can't pinpoint, lack of expression, but I think in a more overarching sense, that's a big aspect of my history with food too, is just not expressing what I need to express, whether it's through creativity or through communication in a relationship. And so by the same token, the healing is from healthy forms of expression, whether that be truth in a relationship or just authenticity and
Mm.
pursuing my creative outlets. So that's what comes up for me. But again, for me, it's just food and intimacy are just so intertwined. Like I remember
Yeah.
years ago, my mom had just stumbled across this book that she found at the marina where they used to keep their boat because people would leave books. And this was a book, and it was called The Spiritual Guide to Weight Loss. And I had been in a 12-step program for a long time when she gave me that book. And I've had a pretty good handle on my overeating. I was in, recovery, so to speak. But I read that book out of curiosity, and it was written from a Christian perspective. And so I was very religious in that sense. But it was so funny because literally two-thirds of that book was about intimacy issues.
Wow. Yeah.
And I just remember feeling blindsided. Wait a second.
Yeah.
How did this person, how did this, Christian minister figure that out? And I just remember like kind of waiting. Okay, so how do you figure out how not to overeat when you've got these intimacy issues? And no, his solution was you find a way to heal those intimacy issues. Like that's the solution. And
Yeah.
I remember thinking, oh, shoot, that's a lot harder than
A lot
just
harder.
learning to,
Control the
navigate the
food.
food issue. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I would say that even now, like I still do rely a whole lot on, for one, I'm single. There you go. So how
Mm.
healed are my intimacy issues? Who knows? But I also do rely a lot on routine and structure. And because I have complete control over my own environment, that bolsters me a lot in my healthy eating. It's been ages since I've binged the way I did in my years in the 12-step program, and I'm grateful for that. But a lot of it is just that I've learned that for me, when I want to eat for emotional reasons, really what I want is like the process of eating. Like I just want a
Right.
lot of food and I
Right.
want to be putting something in my face. And so I've learned, well, I can accomplish some of that emotional hit through just eating whole plant foods that aren't very calorie dense and that don't leave me feeling, sick and disgusting and ashamed the next day. So that's, helped me a lot in terms of controlling some of the consequences of the behavior, but I'm certainly not claiming to be completely healed from the fundamental driver.
Well, and that there may
All
be a
of
relationship, there may be a connection there. Like, I think our ability to continue to satisfy the compulsion with low calorie dense food prevents us from sort of feeling the extent of the pain and the suffering associated with the desire for that behavior.
Sure.
And that
Yeah.
in going through that sort of that crucible, that is on the other side of that, that is where we can acquire something more resembling healing. But as long as we can kind of continue to self-medicate even in a way that doesn't immediately have those same external consequences. And this is
Hmm.
why I point out all the time, like I, sometimes people who are on the pleasure trap side of things will say, well, nobody used to have food addiction because no one was fat, right? Well, first of all, it's not entirely true. But second of all, like plenty of people were doing what you're doing. They were self-soothing with food, but it just wasn't calorically dense enough or processed enough to show up on their bodies in the same way or cause the same kind of health problems. But as soon as the food environment changed, their behaviors were the same, and now they had access to higher calorically dense food, and it did begin to have those physical consequences. I look at my grandmother's sister as a classic example of this. She was a beauty queen in her youth. She was she just didn't have any weight problems or health issues whatsoever in these early photos of her that you'll see from the 30s and 40s and 50s. But then when she begins to have access to that food environment beginning in the 60s, 70s, 80s, she just, became very obese and had a host of health issues. And so the two, and she, because she'd never really healed what was driving her to medicate. It's the same thing when I was drinking, when I was an active alcoholic. If you put two choices in front of me, and one is a 4% beer and one is an 8% beer, I would want the 8% beer because that's going to get me the effect that I want in a much more expeditious way. I'm going to get high faster on the higher alcohol content beer. I'm not drinking it purely for the taste. So I think in the modern food environment, we have all of these complicated interacting factors where it is uh, really this stimulus on our dopamine system that is very unnatural and has been engineered to be such. And we are yearning to escape ourselves, and food really offers a powerful way to do that. And if all you have is broccoli, broccoli will do to some degree. It still helps you escape a little bit. It just doesn't work as well as, pizza and chips will.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about food, of course, is that we have to eat it. We have to eat
Right,
food. And
right.
so we're never going to completely detach from that emotional connection we have with food, even if we're eating, a very
Right.
reasonable amounts during limited times of day, and we're very aware of our feelings. I mean, if food gives you something emotional, then you're always going to be enjoying that aspect of it to some extent. But yeah, it is interesting to me when I am in a different environment and can't rely on those same routines or structures, how uncomfortable it is to sit with feelings. And that sounds
Yeah,
so simplistic, but
it
it's
does.
just amazing, like
And
how
it's
uncomfortable it can
not just
be.
uncomfortable, but for many of us, and I definitely include myself in this, we literally don't know how to do it because we've
Mhm.
always had some way of escaping the feelings. And so, we really don't have much practice and much experience in sitting with feelings. And letting ourselves feel really bad and crying about things and feeling the potential loss or the real loss of an attachment relationship because we have been honest with ourselves and with other people. We just have so many different ways to escape those feelings, whether it's through an actual substance like food, like alcohol, or whether it's behavioral or even and this is something that I am not above of going to kind of like looking for reassurance from friends, that kind of you go girl sort of thing. Like, yeah, your relationship ended, you're better off. Kind of all that stuff it takes us out of the feeling. It takes us out of the immediate thing that is really getting stirred up and in some sense is there to help serve our growth past that thing. But as long as we just kind of want to deflect it and get around it and not feel it, it's probably going to come revisit us in another form. But as I say, I'm certainly not enlightened. And I definitely have reduced the harm of the ways that I medicate myself over time. I've gone from extremely harmful methods to less harmful methods to less and less harmful over time. But I'm not raw dog in life at this point, and I don't think I know many people who are. We're all anesthetizing for one way or another. We are trying to numb ourselves one way or another with something or another.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. And, there's nothing wrong with taking a little break from a feeling
Oh,
for
totally. I
for
mean, I
a
think,
minute, and like you said, there are healthier ways and unhealthier ways of getting that reassurance or just getting
yeah.
out of the
Yeah,
overwhelm of
I,
that
I don't think
feeling.
it serves us, generally speaking, to totally blow out our circuits and overwhelm ourselves with emotional pain. I do know some people who are kind of oriented that way and want to kind of like, I'm just gonna do it, I'm just gonna feel it. And but I think at some point you have to stop the bleeding a little bit, and you don't want to completely overwhelm yourself because that may be counterproductive at some point. But it is just about being mindful about what are you doing, why are you doing it, and really what is the underlying phenomenon that is bringing you back to this place that has created this situation that you find yourself in. And I just want people to kind of get away from that it's the food, stupid kind of argument because yes, the food plays a role and the processed nature of the food plays an important role, but we, I am susceptible to those patterns for reasons that have nothing to do with the food environment.
Yeah, yeah, I'm with you there. And at the same time, I do think that the vegan path offers such a better way to authenticity and to self-expression because just by the very nature of eating, animal flesh and animal byproducts, that requires shutting down a part of yourself.
Yeah,
So just eating, if you're consuming those foods just by consuming them, you're not expressing part of you. You're shutting down your innate compassion. You're shutting down your critical thinking.
it's very true.
So,
Yeah.
so I'm with you in the sense of, the emotional aspect of eating and food behaviors doesn't necessarily have to do with the processed nature of things. But I also do think that the pleasure trap model is useful in that just it's going to be tough to follow, an emotionally sane path if you in your home environment you're surrounded by hyper palatable
Very true.
foods and
Yeah.
all of that. So mindful eating and intuitive eating and all those practices, like I think they have their merit and there's useful information that can be gleaned for purposes of self-discovery and that sort of thing. But I think as just like a long-term model, it's tough if it ignores the pleasure trap
Oh,
component.
100%. I mean, yeah, I'm not gonna keep, my favorite 9% IPA in the house, and I'm not gonna dabble. I'm not gonna mess with that. Like I know that that has power over my brain in a way that I really cannot control. So, yeah, I'm not gonna tempt fate with that. And I think you're making things a lot harder for yourself if you're trying to do a form of intuitive eating that includes a lot of processed food or, hyper palatable foods. And so I want the two things to kind of be used together. You're going to be
Right.
better off overall physically and emotionally if you can kind of keep your environment pretty clean and, commit yourself to eating healthy, whole, natural food as much as possible. And there's work to do beyond that.
Right, right, exactly. That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
not the end of the story. That's yeah,
Not.
one
It's
step.
the beginning. I mean, just
Yeah.
like in AA, putting down the alcohol, you haven't begun recovery. You haven't even
Right.
started to the process of recovery. So there's a whole lot of work to do beyond, well, I'm not drinking anymore. I'm sober. So
Yeah.
isn't that everything I need to do? And I have not picked up a drink since 2013, but I really only consider myself to have begun recovery within about the last 2 years, like really doing the work that needed to
Mm,
be done and not just kind of going through the motions. And, I went
yeah.
to meetings and I did some steps and I sort of, or I did what I defined as doing the steps at the time, but I really have a very different feeling about it at this point in my life. And I'm committed to the process in a different way. And
Mm,
so it's the paths, it's distinct. Sobriety and recovery are distinct, and food abstinence and recovery, including everything that brought you to a disordered relationship with food to begin with, are also distinct processes.
yeah, yeah, totally agree. And I also think that the bottom line is different substances work for different people. I used to assume that it was everybody's number one fantasy to just like binge their brains out on,
Yeah.
junk food. And a lot of people, that's not their that's not their biggest fantasy. Other
No.
people, like for instance, you're a recovering alcoholic. Alcohol just never really did it for me. It just
Hmm.
never really did much. So
Hmm.
I just could care less about alcohol. I just
Hmm.
could care less.
Yeah.
So there's that aspect too. Like we can't control if a particular substance works for us. And for
Yeah.
me, food is the one.
Which is so interesting because, I've talked to Adam Sudd about this before, who I have an interview with on my YouTube channel. And he's out there kind of in the addiction space talking about his history with addiction. He's very open about it. And he was more drawn toward uppers, we could say, and I was more drawn toward downers. So I wanted to kind of suppress and escape. And he wanted to have this like, exaggerated sense of competence and excitement about things. And it's just very, very interesting. And food is also very numbing, very escapist, very, you can't think about much or feel much if you've loaded yourself with. I mean, I've talked to clients who will eat 10,000 calories at a time. I don't know that I've ever managed to do that. Maybe when I was younger.
I
Um,
definitely have.
but
Oh
really,
yeah. Oh yeah.
wow,
Oh
wow.
yeah.
I mean, over the course of a day, maybe not in one meal, but thousands and thousands and thousands of calories of fatty, high calorically dense food that your body is like, oh wow, we all hands on deck to digest this because this is going to take a lot of energy and a lot of attention and a lot of blood flow. And we just that, all you can feel is your discomfort and your misery physically, which gets you very nicely out of whatever kind of agitation you were feeling before that binge. And I have been there many times and did not realize that that's why I was doing it. But in
Yeah.
retrospect, that's a big part of it.
Yeah, yeah, for me too, because my binges were massive. I would sometimes have seizures, and then I would be so sick and uncomfortable the next day, even
Yeah.
if I didn't have a seizure, that it wasn't until I had been given a question. I was working with a sponsor in a 12-step program at the time, and there was a set of relapse questions. And I remember one of the questions was, why don't I want to get well? And I just remember being struck by that question. Wait a second. Of course I want to get well. But then writing on this question, I realized that kind of like you were getting at that unpleasantness and all the horrible side effects, they too were a form of escape because I would be feeling so bad on
Oh
those
yeah.
days that I gave myself permission to not think about the rest of my life, to
Yep.
not think about anything but getting through the day.
Yep.
And so it was a form of escape in that sense.
In the moment it is, and also with alcohol for many years and with food pretty much my entire life, my life is oriented around this thing, like my whole life, whether I'm using or not, whether it's like I'm in an active binge or a binge hangover or not, it's still, oh, life is really, I can't really arrive in life until I get a handle on this and until I lose weight or until, insert your sort of conception of what is standing in your way here. And this is true for many of my clients who have just been sort of circling around the same, like this thing. I need to resolve this thing or I can't be myself. I can't be a grown up. I can't have real relationships. I can't pursue my goals in life. I don't arrive until I fix this thing. And I really relate to that very much. And so we are not accustomed to thinking of that as a type of secondary gain like the other things, where, yeah, we definitely escape through the binge itself, through the recover, like the misery the next day. But also just, I don't have to take real responsibility for myself and my life as long as this is the thing that is standing in my way, because I have to focus on this. I don't have to think about anything else. And that is perhaps the biggest escape of all.
Yeah, yeah. And that was a factor for me for sure. I remember also in my 30s, late 20s and 30s, I remember I was still trying to lose weight. I was caught up in that dynamic, and I was also worried about getting older. And I just remember part of what fueled like my mental, you know, gymnastics were just I knew I would get older, but I was going to be thinner. So still overall, I would look better because
Hmm.
I'd have lost weight. So it helped me not think so much about aging and just
Hmm.
the effect that that would have on
Exactly.
my,
And that's exactly what happens. Yeah.
so yeah, very interesting. Yeah, a lot there. But I want to shift gears a little bit to
Yeah.
a somewhat related topic that I've gotten a few questions about. And neither of us is a medical doctor, so obviously none of this will be medical advice. But I've been asked some questions and to discuss our thoughts on menopause. And a lot of people are promoting these, hormone replacement therapies,
Mm.
HRTs. And so, yeah, just where's where are you with all this menopause stuff? I don't necessarily mean personally, but just what's your overall take on that phase of life?
Yeah, this is rich terrain. There's lots to
For
talk about.
sure. Yeah.
I mean, I guess the first thing I would say is let's just look at the phrase hormone replacement therapy by itself. And like, why do we feel the need to replace these hormones? Like, what are we trying to prevent and preserve rather than to go into a natural phase of life that is taking us to a different place? And, I insert all the disclaimers here. Again, not a medical doctor. And I think this journey of menopause is very different for every woman. And I certainly have known women, and I think it's absolutely reasonable, and I am not ruling it out for myself, to do kind of short-term HRT treatments to alleviate specific symptoms that are really, harming a person's quality of life. I do think, again, not being a medical doctor, not knowing anything other than what I've done for my own purposes, for my own research, that the evidence is the balance of the evidence is that they are less dangerous and have fewer side effects if you use them for less time, which makes sense, right? So if you're going to do it, I would urge people to really consider and talk to their physicians about doing it in a very time limited way and in a very targeted way for specific symptom relief, not in sort of a general holistic, I don't want to feel this menopause thing anymore. I don't want to go through this phase. I don't want to go through this transition. I'm not ready to embrace what that different phase of life is going to bring to me. And I want to hang on to the physical characteristics and the emotional characteristics and everything else that accompanies a more youthful version of myself. And so that is where I think we run into real trouble, because people confuse those two things. And there is a part of them that is being dragged into the second half of their life kicking and screaming. They don't want to go because they cannot imagine where their status and where their value is going to come from if it's not attached to all of the markers of youthfulness that have always been kind of their ticket to status their entire life. And for women who have, and we've talked about this before a little bit, where they've been able to generate a lot of sense of safety from how men relate to them, whether they're deliberately and overtly kind of using their body and their beauty to manipulate men, or whether they just experience this feeling that men who find me attractive are safer to be around. And I think that's a really common thing. So you may not necessarily want to sleep with the guy, or you probably don't, but most women, if they really interrogated themselves, I think would admit I generally feel safer around a guy who's attracted to me than someone who's not. He's gonna be um, he's gonna protect me better. He's gonna protect me from other men. Um, and I would obviously the exception here is like a real kind of purely sexual projection on the part of the man where he wants to claim you and possess you as his own or whatever. That doesn't feel very safe. But men who just are sort of, and there's a distinction and women can tell, the guy at Home Depot who's helping you with your thing that you're having a little low level flirtatious little dance with, not because you're looking to date him or you're interested in him, but because you want a feeling from him that he wants to help you, that he wants to make life easier for you. That is pretty universal to the female experience. And that is something that is on the cutting room floor with menopause. Like that goes away. And, we hear all the time in the groups that we're in, and I hear from clients about feeling like they're becoming invisible in older age. And that is what that invisibility is about, is invisibility specifically to men who offer them a feeling of safety and not having to figure everything out for themselves and everything that goes along with that. So I would just encourage anybody who is at this threshold and who's considering HRT or who is otherwise trying to just deal with the tsunami of emotional volatility that comes with this period of time in a woman's life to ask themselves those kinds of questions. And, what would it mean to not have this capacity anymore and to not have this kind of form of power, frankly? And what sort of feelings does that bring up in me? And do I seek to avoid those feelings? And then to balance the question of whether they are a good candidate for something like HRT, or its many derivatives, including estrogen creams and all of those things. Like, does it make sense for me individually, personally? That's a conversation between them and their doctor.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Just a couple things you mentioned really stuck out to me. For one, this conception that this is a period of time of such emotional volatility, like we're crazy, like women are fairly sane for some of their lives, but during this period we're just completely crazy. Like, and
Right.
to me, I don't know, I'm just a little skeptical of that characterization. Uh, yeah. I don't, I personally, I mean, I'm smack dab in the middle of this whole process. I'm 56
Mm-hmm.
and I, I don't, I mean, I'm not claiming to completely, like you said, enlightened or completely, equanimous, but I don't think I'm any crazier than, than I have been in other periods in my life.
Yeah.
So there's that. And then, regarding the hormone replacement, I mean, I don't really know enough about them to know if they really do produce more youthfulness in a physical sense. Do they make you look younger? Do they make you look better?
They
If that's
can.
the case, and like that's a different motivator. I'm not clear if they actually do even accomplish that. But to me, just our society pathologizes so many normal things, normal behaviors,
Mm.
normal reactions to life. And so to me, this concept that they're characterizing menopause, perimenopause as this disorder that
Right.
needs
That's the
that needs a
key.
medical
Yeah.
pharmaceutical remedy.
Yeah.
It just, like, where did that even come from? It wouldn't even have crossed my mind if I hadn't been hearing about it from other people. And at least as far as I can tell, I've never experienced a hot flash. I know my mom did have them because she would say, "Oh, hot flash, hot flash."
Hmm.
Um, I don't think I've ever had one. So to me, and I watched a presentation. I think it was on Chef AJ's channel, but she was looking at different cultures, different societies, and how they conceive of this time of life. And
Hmm.
there are some cultures that just really don't. I think maybe it was the Japanese culture, but I think they maybe didn't even have a word for it. You know,
Hmm.
it was just, and I could be getting mistaken in that regard, but it
I know
was just,
there's no word for hot flash in Japanese for sure.
okay, okay.
But I think I don't know about Japanese specifically, but yeah, different cultures, it's considered it's not pathologized in the same way.
Yeah, it's just a time of,
It's
yeah,
like
just it's,
adolescence. It's adult, we don't medicate adolescents for the most part, although that's changing.
yeah,
Um, and certainly there are cases where we medicate it to the extreme, which is a whole other topic things, but we
yeah,
don't generally look at a person who is going through the transition of adolescence and all of the changes that that brings to their body and to their moods and to the ways that they relate to other people and say, oh, we need to keep you in the former stage that you were in because we don't want you
right,
to go into this next stage. And yeah, I mean, I think it forfeits so much of the wisdom of that passage that then becomes available to women. And it's been very true for me, and I'm on the still in the perimenopause stage of things, but it does feel um like sobering up. It really does feel like sobering up. It feels like there's sort of a uh, you know, the veil has been lifted from my eyes, and I sort of see I have a different relationship with reality. I have a different relationship with my self-trust. And a lot of this it's a little hard for me to tell how much of that is from the physical changes and perimenopause in general, and how much is from, 12-step work and recovery work and intensive work with my therapist and all of that, because it's all kind of coincided over the last couple of years. But definitely I would not trade that for kind of the youthful maidenhood and naivete that was my primary currency for my 20s and 30s. Like that worked very well for the era that it was. But I would prefer to continue pursuing increased wisdom about myself and my body and my authority and all of that, even if it comes at this price of the fact that our bodies are changing and that people will see us differently. But yeah, I'm totally with you. I find it just absolutely repugnant how it is pathologized and it's considered a disorder, and the way that men will talk about women during this phase of life and how they're just so crazy and unstable and you just don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I know men who don't want to date women unless they're very much ahead of perimenopause, so they're in their 30s or very early 40s, or they are on the other side of menopause. They just don't even want to touch like 38 to 52. You know? And so good luck with that, like women are just like men are, although I think men in general in our culture are better compartmentalized about things. Women are very emotional, and during this period of time, they're going to be wearing those emotions perhaps more on their sleeve than at other times in their life. But what I see happen in so many cases is that the women are colluding in the pathologizing effort because they want to maintain those relationships. They don't want to drive their husband away. They don't want to alarm their family and their coworkers. They want to be sort of seen the way that they want to be seen. And this harkens back to the beginning of the conversation with telling the truth and insecure relationships. If you kind of go in on the argument that I just don't know, my moods are just so crazy and my periods are so wild and I'm just being yanked around by my emotions, so therefore I need to medicate that and to stabilize it. I think in many cases you are in some sense um, trying to preserve a version of yourself that is maybe not the true version of yourself.
yeah, interesting. And I think PMS does a little of that too for people who
Hmm.
have really
Yep.
extreme PMS. And I have a good friend who's a vegan, and he told me about one of his old girlfriends who had had really extreme PMS, and she just would get very irritable and grumpy and grouchy and just really be very raw and kind of unpleasant. And he told me that he had told her, I love you when you're like this because
Mm.
I am seeing them kind of the most authentic, unvarnished version of you. You're not trying to pretend anything. And
Mm.
so I just thought that was super sweet. And that's obviously an example of a secure, a
Very
secure
secure.
relationship
Yes.
where the person wants more truth. The more truth, the better.
Yeah,
Um,
and may we all find such a relationship because that is that is I mean, yeah, it's not about the man sort of catering to her and sort of like, oh, you're in your crazy phase of the month, and so let me bring you ice cream and, hot blankets and all that kind of stuff. But that he welcomes the thinness of the facade that happens during that time, which I think is definitely a big part of women who experience pretty extreme PMS or PMDD. It is that they just don't like the usual capacity to mask that they have had the rest of the month is just not there during that time. And so the anger is coming up, everything is just going to be much closer to the surface, and there is a lot more truth available in that moment. But if she is experiencing the sort of bubbling up of that truth as a threat, which a lot of women do, like, oh, I realize that during this time, you can't live with me. It's really difficult, and she wants to suppress it. Then it's really only going to make itself known in ways that are not as productive as they could be if she really leaned into it and realized this is an opportunity to get more in touch with what I am really feeling because I'm not going to be able to hide it from myself as well as I normally can.
mm.
And menopause is just like that in a at scale.
Right. And also there are a lot of benefits to it. Number one, not not having to deal with the logistics of this
Totally.
monthly cycle.
Totally.
So, you
Yeah.
know,
The
it's
logistics are significant.
yeah, really significant. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I think if men had any idea how significant they are, and how painful physically it can be and all of
right.
that, but that's not the world we live in. So
Yeah.
yeah, the physical benefits and all of that, especially if you can go through the transition with a minimum of the physical symptoms like hot flashes and the things that you're describing, which I think there's pretty good evidence are linked to a standard American diet. You're going to have a harder time um, eating animal foods, dairy products, all those kinds of things than you are if you're on a relatively low fat vegan diet, whole food vegan diet.
Yeah. Yeah. And then of course just the benefits of abandoning any lingering fantasies of
uh,
just
of rescue and
of rescue
yes,
or,
yes,
the Prince Charming.
totally. I mean, it is time for those things. Those things have to die. They have to die. We have to, and there's a real grief mourning process associated with that that we're sort of confronted with during this age, and it requires a lot of courage to allow for the reality that that dream has had its day and it's done, and you are no longer the damsel in distress, and now you have been handed this massive amount of responsibility for your own life. And who wants that? Most people don't want that. We think we want it. We think we want to be the author of our own lives and to pursue our own sense of what it means to be successful in the world, but it's still very much colored by this childish maiden view of things, which ends in a happily ever after with our prince. And to get past that is not easy. It is really, really in us very deeply, and to let it go and to move past it is this massive, massive reckoning and a really significant grief process that people should take more seriously.
Yeah. Yeah. And then for the record, I mean, I don't think it's just women. Like Eric Fromm
Right.
wrote his,
Right.
his really popular book, Escape from Freedom,
Yep.
way back in the day. We all
Yeah.
we want freedom on some level, but we're also just with freedom comes a lot of opportunity and a lot of responsibility, no
Well,
one.
and who is a man if he's not the rescuer of the woman? Like
Mm,
that's, I think there is a equivalent challenge for them. They may not be going through quite the same physical transition, although they have their own stuff happening. But I think for them to, what does it
mm,
mean to like, be in a relationship in my 50s and 60s and beyond? What
mm,
is relationship for? What am
mm.
I, who am I if I'm not playing this kind of white knight who is adding all of this value to my damsel in distress.
Mm,
That's really challenging to them, and they have to kind of go inward and figure out, who am I that a woman would actually want to be a companion with in this phase of
mm,
life, and what do I bring to the relationship in that sense, and how do I want to love her if it's not just rescuing her.
right, right. Okay, so a challenge put forth to both men and women.
Yes, this is
So,
it's the challenge of being an adult that comes for us in our late 40s.
right,
Yeah,
right.
you can
Okay.
you can ignore that call if you want to. You're a free agent, but I
Yeah,
think if
you're
you
only young once, but you can be immature forever.
you can be, but it will keep coming for you. The
It
the
will
the
keep coming.
invitation from the universe will get louder and more insistent.
The call. Yes, the call.
The call.
Okay. Well, we'll leave it there. And as always, we close every episode by taking 30 seconds of silence for the animals. So, Jen, I invite you to join me in 30 seconds of silence for all the suffering animals, human and non human, who desire, as we all do, safety, happiness, and the freedom to live out their lives without interference. And we'll conclude with the sound of the bell. Thank you, Jen, and thank you, Posse. See you next time. Until then, stay strong and stay true.
Thank you. Stay true.